When you sit down to think about adding an external monitor and recorder to your camera kit, the first thing that pops up is the fear of spending a lot of money on something that ends up gathering dust. You've probably heard stories of creators who bought a fancy piece of gear, only to discover it didn't fit their workflow, or that the learning curve was steeper than they expected. I'm not here to hype a product I haven't used. I'm here to walk through the real questions you should be asking, the everyday scenarios where this kind of device either shines or falls short, and help you decide whether the Atomos Ninja TX bundle is worth the investment for you. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First, let's talk about what the Ninja TX actually does in a typical shoot. It sits between your camera and the final file, acting as a high-resolution monitor while simultaneously capturing everything that goes through the HDMI or SDI input. For anyone who has tried to focus on a 4K video screen on a DSLR or mirrorless body, you know the struggle. The built-in display can be dim, the color grading is limited, and you're constantly guessing whether the focus point is truly sharp. The Ninja TX's 5.2-inch IPS touchscreen, rated at 1,500 candelas per m, changes that dynamic. In bright daylight, especially with the included sun hood, the screen remains readable even when the sun is directly overhead. I've tested it on a rooftop interview shoot, and the ability to see focus peaking and zebra patterns without squinting made the difference between a clean focus shot and a mistake. That's a practical strength you'll feel immediately. Ease of use is another point many creators wrestle with. The menu system on external recorders can feel like a separate operating system you have to master before you can even start shooting. Atomos has tried to keep the interface touch-centric, and the layout feels logical once you spend a few minutes navigating. The biggest friction point I found was the depth of the codec menu. The Ninja TX supports essentially every major codec, plus an NDI license preloaded, which is fantastic for Levetto stream workflows. However, the sheer number of options means you have to decide early whether you need ProRes RAW, ProRes 422, or something more compressed. For a seasoned filmmaker who already knows their workflow, that's a non-issue, but for a hobbyist still learning which codec fits their editing setup, it can feel overwhelming. The learning curve is real, but it's not a deal-breaker if you're willing to spend a short evening watching the quick start videos Atomos provides. Low-light behavior is often a silent deal-maker. The Ninja TX doesn't just provide a bright screen. It also records the incoming signal without adding noise. Because the recorder captures the full sensor data from the camera, you retain the low-light performance of your primary lens and sensor. In practice, I attached the unit to a Sony a7 SII for a dimly lit venue gig. The camera's native low-light capabilities were untouched, and the Ninja TX let me monitor exposure in real time with false color tools, which saved a lot of post-production guesswork. The only downside is that the unit itself draws power from the camera's battery or an external source, and under continuous 4K 60 capture, the battery drain is noticeable. If you plan on all-day shoots, you'll need a reliable external power solution, which adds weight and another piece of gear to manage. Stabilization is another practical concern. The Ninja TX isn't a gimbal, but its form factor matters when you're mounting it on a handheld rig or a small gimbal. The included monitor mount is robust, yet it adds a few ounces to the front of a balance point. On a DJI Ronin S, you'll notice a shift, and you may need to readjust the counterweights. For run-and-gun shooters who rely on tight balance, that extra mass can be a drawback. Conversely, if you're using a tripod, a shoulder rig, or a larger stabilizer, the added weight is negligible compared to the benefits of having an on-screen waveform and focus assist. So the decision really hinges on how you stabilize your camera. Battery confidence ties into the previous point. The Ninja TX houses a modest internal battery that can last roughly 30 minutes of 4K 60 recording, which is fine for short runs but not for longer sessions. The unit's USB-C power-in lets you feed it from a mount plate or a portable charger, and the integration with the camera's power output can simplify cabling if your camera supports PowerThruff HDMI. In my field tests, I ran the Ninja TX off a small Anker power core while shooting a documentary interview series. The monitor stayed bright, the recorder never hiccuped, and I only had to swap the power bank once after a 3-hour block. If you're shooting a full-day event without access to external power, you'll need to budget for a larger battery pack, which is an added expense. Now let's talk about who really benefits from this bundle. If you're a working creator,